boomerangs, bombs, dungeons, magic swords, puzzles, and green tunics. Welcome to The Legend of Zelda. While the late 80s and early 90s were quite good to Link, the mid-90s were like Ganon's Sacred Realm for Zelda fans, empty and miserable. Nintendo was busy developing a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo with Sony, but soon broke the contract to join with Philips. Sony went on to create the PlayStation, and Nintendo eventually dropped the add-on project altogether. However, while partnering with Philips, Nintendo let them borrow the rights to the characters Link, Zelda, and Ganon. Philips went on to create its own CDI console and used its Ticket to Hyrule to make 3 Zelda games: Link, The Faces of Evil, Zelda, The Wand of Gamelon, and Zelda's Adventures. Released throughout 1993 and 1994, these games were an absolute joke. Nintendo took no part in developing them, and most fans wish they had never been made. Time slowly crept by for Nintendo fans as they crossed their fingers for Link's true return. It was clear that the industry would have to move into 3D, and everyone's favorite franchise friends would be forced to go with it. This was exciting, but given the unpredictable nature of the Zelda franchise, no one knew what to expect. When the Nintendo 64 was released in 1996, Mario's first appearance in 3D gave gamers a taste of the incredible adventure to come. 2 years later, that quest was dubbed the Ocarina of Time. Pre-ordering the 5th installment in the series guaranteed you a gold-colored cartridge and a chance to experience the future of action role-playing. The moment gamers stepped out onto the main field and saw the sun slowly rise over Hyrule Castle, they knew Link's world would never be the same. While it felt like a completely new gameplay experience at first, longtime fans soon realized it was essentially the same game, but from a thrilling new perspective. All of the 2D elements were there. Hyrule was a massive open world, each town was full of NPCs for shopping and questing, and each dungeon was packed with hidden treasures and dangerous enemies. It was a formula Nintendo had been perfecting for over a decade, and it was an indescribable joy to see it play out in third and first person. Players had to rediscover and relearn the boomerang, the bow, and hookshot, as well as wield the Master Sword with unprecedented precision. Ocarina of Time introduced a revolutionary lock-on targeting system that meant no more aimless bow casting or sword swinging. Your faithful fairy, Navi, guided you through this new mode of combat by telling you where to look and describing things once you selected them. This new way to play became essential when your adventure introduced you to shielded and sword-wielding enemies, as well as several larger-than-life bosses with hidden sweet spots. Your updated arsenal was not complete without a few new entries, like the hidden passage-finding Lens of Truth and the ability to enchant your arrows with fire, ice, or light. Having already made a fashion statement with his signature green getup, Link could now try on a red tunic for fire protection and a blue tunic for breathing underwater. His ensemble could be further customized with boots for sinking into the abyss or gliding on air, a shield for reflecting light sources, and a giant sword that could not be broken. All of these were hidden somewhere in the game. But one of the biggest additions was revealed the moment you booted up Ocarina of Time. In the middle of the world map was Lon Lon Ranch, and trapped within its gates was a trusty companion that would become Link's inseparable pal. After a couple of trips around the track and a triumphant leap over the wall, the horse Epona was yours to ride. She would come when called, leap when able, and free Link up to use his bow and arrow while racing across the open countryside. The most significant enhancement, and one that was pivotal to the core of the storyline, was the ocarina itself. Legendary composer Koji Kondo returned to the Zelda series for the 4th time to score the N64 adventure, composing 10 unique themes that could be manually played by the players themselves. As Link encountered pivotal story characters, they passed down their knowledge in the form of a quick tune you could tap out using the yellow directional buttons. These infectious ditties served as the backbone for the game's brilliant musical score. While these tunes helped Link open doors, turn day into night, and even transport himself across the world map, uncovering the Master Sword led to the game's biggest surprise. After pulling the blade from its resting place, Link was trapped in a dimension that catapulted him right through puberty into adulthood. This plot shift changed everything from the weapons he could use, to the moves he could perform, to the places he could go. But no location he rediscovered in this apocalyptic future was the way he left it. In the time Link was gone, Ganon had cast his evil shadow over the land and tainted all who lived there, similar to his nefarious deeds in A Link to the Past. While Link could eventually travel back to the time he remembered, he would have to face off against an oversized future Ganon to stop him once and for all. While many expected the next Zelda title from Nintendo to exceed everyone's expectations, Ocarina of Time was truly a masterpiece. The graphics might not have been on a PlayStation performance level, and the water temple was absolute torture, but the balance in between all the quests the game had to offer was eternally gratifying. It remains one of the finest achievements in gaming. So how do you top that? Following the endless critical success of the Ocarina of Time, including numerous perfect scores and Game of the Year nods from major gaming publications, Nintendo decided to guide the Zelda series through another sharp turn, one that a lot of fans found unsettling. 2 years later, Nintendo once again took Link out of Hyrule on another doomed vacation and charged him with saving the time-trapped town of Termina in Majora's Mask. From the very beginning, fans were stripped of everything they had grown to love. Navi was missing, Epona was stolen, even the Ocarina itself was ripped from Link's hands. To make matters worse, the evil Skull Kid turned Link into a Deku scrub, forcing players to get used to the game's biggest development. The sequel was all about masks, and the hidden power some of them possessed to transform Link into one of 3 different creatures: the aforementioned pedal-piloting Deku, a boulder-rolling Goron, and a wave-riding Zora. All of these races appeared in Ocarina of Time and other previous Zelda titles, but this was the first time Link could see through their eyes and use their unique abilities. Some of the dungeons required you to switch back and forth between them on the fly, creating puzzle opportunities even the Zelda Elite had never seen before. Ocarina also featured masks, but you could only carry a few at a time, where Majora had an inventory of 24 slots you filled in as you ventured on. These transformations seem to replace Link's ability to become his older self, a detail some fans sorely missed. While there was no way for Link to travel into the future, he could eventually drop 3 days into the past again and again, a cycle that became Majora's unique method of storytelling. Playing by the clock meant you had a little extra pressure to complete your objectives, because if the cycle was left to finish, Clock Town and the world around it would be destroyed by the evil moon looming over the land. Those that were patient enough to relive the same 3 days over and over began to notice the subtle differences between Majora and Ocarina. While the Hyrule map in Ocarina was larger than the Termina map in Majora, Termina was much more detailed. NPCs weren't glued to the ground or aimlessly running around. They had a schedule, a purpose, and a story to tell if you dug deep enough. After you learned one character's secret, it added a twinge of familiarity when you saw them walking the same path again and again. This also replaced the dimension-swapping gameplay that permeated the other Zelda titles. A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time both featured dueling dimensions that you had to travel between several times. Termina was one big map and one huge world to save. You just had so many days to see it all. While Termina was not Hyrule by any means, it did share certain similarities. It was this fish-out-of-water feeling that made some fans uncomfortable. Lots of loyal Zelda followers were disappointed the sequel strayed so far from the formula, especially after Ocarina of Time had almost perfected it. This is easy to think if you consider Majora's Mask a standalone sequel. As far as the story is concerned, it branches off into very bizarre and dark territory. While the subject matter suggested a more somber tone, the game seemed to be primarily about healing. All of your masked compatriots had their own custom healing song, and your objectives involved curing the land from the conditions that poisoned it. But from a gameplay perspective, the two Nintendo 64 titles complement each other beautifully. One brought the humongous land of Hyrule to life in two eras for the price of one, and the other sought to look closer at the world and the intricate characters living in it. Essentially, each one has what the other one doesn't, and many consider the sequel to be as exceptional as the original. As we travel onward through our tour of Zelda's lineage, we come upon Nintendo's most financially successful console of all time, the Game Boy, which allowed Link to redefine how handheld RPGs were made, with his color adventure too big to fit into one cartridge, the Oracle of Seasons and Ages, and the GameCube and Game Boy Advance multiplayer crossover, Four Swords Adventures.